Been a while since we've heard the old rugged cross. Thank you, Aaron. That was beautiful. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming out today, braving these roads and showing up today. It's good to see everybody here today. Thank you for coming out and welcome. And welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube. We appreciate you as well. If you are ever in this area, I invite you to come and be a part of one of our services. I promise you that we will do our absolute best to make you feel right at home. You know, you're probably sitting home, the YouTube people, watching in their pajamas. That doesn't seem quite fair. But, you're really missing out a lot, too, because the comfort of watching in your pajamas doesn't compare to the warmth of a hug or the warmth of a handshake. So I invite you to come and experience that as well. The month of December, I've kind of wrestled with that, what I was going to do, really even on the Camino when we got back. And I came to the conclusion that I would look at Christmas from different facets. I'd look at this time of year from different viewpoints. And so this week I'm going to look at the birth of Jesus through the eyes of Matthew. Next week we're going to look at that same event through the eyes of Luke. And then on the 18th or the 22nd, we will look at that season, not necessarily solstice, but the entire season through the Norse eyes and things like the Yule log and the, sometimes we call them pagan traditions and different ways of looking at it. And then seeing how modern culture has smushed those all together. And in smushing everything together into one event, it certainly made it beautiful. It's made it just awesome in a lot of ways. But we've left out a few things, and we'll look at a few of the things we may have left out and look at some of maybe the meanings that we might have missed. So that's what we're going to be doing for the month of December. And we start with, this week we're going to look at the birth of Jesus through the eyes of Matthew. Now, I don't know whether this really happened this way or not. I'm old, but I wasn't that old. I wasn't around back then. I don't know if this really happened or not, but that's unimportant. What's important is the story. And you've heard me say that many, many times. It's an old Eastern tradition, how the storytellers told their stories in ancient times. Before things were written down and passed on from generation to generation, it was done through the oral tradition. And very often the storyteller started his story by saying, I don't know whether this happened or not. But that's unimportant. The important thing is the story. So that's what we're going to look at today. And I want to thank Christina for the sacred reading. Really captured a lot of the modern look at the Gospel of Matthew in regard to the birth of Jesus. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judah, as opposed to Bethlehem of Galilee, in the days of Herod the king, there came Magi from the east to Jerusalem. And they were saying, where is the King of the Jews who's been born? For we've seen his star in the east, and we've come to worship him. Behold, the star in the east was going before them, until it stood above the place where the infant boy was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly. And they entered the house, wasn't a stable with animals and all that. When they entered the house and saw the infant boy with Mary, his mother, they threw themselves down and worshipped him. And they opened their treasures and offered to him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. That's kind of most of what we have of the story today from Matthew. Things that are sort of left out or overlooked or not emphasized on that. The gospel according to Matthew starts out with, well, a quarter of the whole story of Jesus' birth is all the begats. This guy begat that guy who begat that guy, on and on and on. And it lists them all. It's got 14 begats between Abraham and David. And then it's got 14 more begats between David and the exile to Babylon. And it's got 14 more begats between coming back from Babylon until the current time that it was written, would have been the time of Jesus' birth. So there was a lot of anticipation something big was going to be happen because we've had 14 begats. And you figure average lifespan in those days was about 35 years. If you lived much longer than that, like Joseph, he was really an old geezer. He was like 42. So he was really an old guy. But lifespan was mid-30s. Figuring that, women got married at 14, depending on when they had their first kid. Most men were married in their late teens. Let's figure that the generational gap in there somewhere is going to be somewhere around 25 years. So for every 14 of those begats, we've got about 350 years. So if we go all the way from Abraham to Jesus, we're looking at over 1,000 years, over a millennium, most of which was all done in the oral tradition. And we all know how accurate stories are told, one to the other, to the other, to the other. The reason that the author of Matthew stressed so vehemently, he was really important. That's why he listed every one of the begats. See, he wanted to make sure that everybody fully understood that Jesus was a Jew. And not only was he a Jew, he was a Jew descended directly from Abraham. We've got the lineage. Here it is. Dad to son, all the way down. Jesus was primarily a Jew. And we talk about the wise men coming from the east, and they're following a star. Well, they're coming from the east. That's probably Persia. So they were probably Zoroastrians. And, we don't know if that really happened or not. It's definitely possible. There were a lot of trade routes going through there. They could very easily have been coming through and carrying valuables. So that's, we don't have a lot of fact around it, but it's certainly highly possible. So I wouldn't discount that. Another guy in there that's not mentioned very much that is important is Herod, the king. Herod was a Roman. He was put in this area, in the Middle East, for one and only one purpose, and that was to keep the Jews peaceful, to keep them from causing trouble. Collect the taxes, don't cause trouble, life is good. So when he heard that there was rumor that there was going to be a new king of the Jews, he was really uncomfortable because he was afraid that this new king of the Jews could be a rabble-rouser, could be a trouble causer, and could be a pain for him. And he had a pretty good lifestyle. He was powerful. He could do anything about it he wanted to. He lived in a nice palace. Life was good. He had a lot of wives. He had everything. So he didn't want to upset that apple cart. But Herod was a Roman. Now, the wise men gave these gifts to Jesus of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then they returned home without telling Herod where Jesus was. We've got these wise men, and they're following this star, and we don't know what happened for sure, but they seem to veer off the path and take a pit stop in Jerusalem for a while. And they weren't following the star anymore. They were in Jerusalem, and Herod had heard these rumors that there was a new king of the Jews to be born, and that these wise guys were coming from the east to worship him. So he sent for them, and he said, hey, I want you to go out and find this new king of the Jews and tell me about him, tell me where it is, so I can go worship him too. Well, that sounded reasonable enough to them, so they got on their camels and took off again. Now they're following a star again, and they make their way to Bethlehem. Bethlehem of Judah, not Bethlehem of Galilee. Got to get in the right Bethlehem. So they arrived there, and they didn't go to the manger. They didn't go to the stable. They went to a house, and they went in, and they bowed before the new king, and they gave him these gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, another thing then, instead of going back through Jerusalem, as Herod had instructed him to do, the angel came to him at night and said, don't do that. Go straight, go back to Persia a different way. So they did that, and that really made Herod mad. Now, what doesn't get talked about today, and this is really plain in the Gospel according to Matthew, is Herod was so mad that he decided he was going to go kill all of the babies in Bethlehem and all the surrounding area. So he ordered the soldiers to go out, and they killed every male baby under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and all the surrounding area. And then the angel showed up to Joseph. Joseph, next to Jesus in the birth of Jesus tale according to Matthew, was really the next most important guy. Joseph got a lot of good ink. And the angel came to Joseph and said, you better beat feet out of here and take Jesus with you, because Herod's going to kill all the babies. So I don't know this, I wasn't there, but it looks to me like what he probably did is he cashed in the gold, and the frankincense and the myrrh were really expensive things, and that's what he used to finance his trip to Egypt. And he would have stayed there about 8 years. It looks, if you a little quick math, it would have been about 8 before Herod died, and they returned to Palestine. Now, there's some of this that we can look at through the eyes of history and say, I don't know. The whole wise man thing. It could have happened. I'm not one to say that it didn't. It's possible. And I would even say maybe even likely that it could have happened. But the whole thing with killing the babies and all that likely never happened. There is no historical record of that happening in any other place other than the Gospel of Matthew. There were no mass graves. There was never an abundance of graves of children 2 and under found that would have supported that a whole bunch of children under 2 were slaughtered. Just too many things adding up, and it probably never happened. But maybe that's why it didn't make it into today. It got in the cutting room floor. But I think it's important that we look and see, what does this story mean? And it's appropriate, I think, to start with the symbols. What are some of the symbols? The wise men. What do the wise men represent? And to me, the wise men represent infinite intelligence. They represent the triune nature of God. Now, Matthew never says how many of them there were. We've decided that there were 3 because they were 3 gifts. We had the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know how many of them there were, but we can, by the number of gifts, and we put it together that there are 3, but we can say that represents the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. We can say that it represents a teaching symbol. It represents, seed, soil, plant. It represents, spirit, soul, and body. We can assign any number of things to that triune nature of the infinite intelligence. And thirdly, I think that the wise men represent the supreme power and the supreme presence in the universe. They represent that infinite being, that thing that we call God or Spirit. Secondly, the star. What does the star represent? Boy, to me, the star represents our intuition. It represents our own inner guidance, that thing that we're all born with that lets us know, that seems like a good idea, or maybe I shouldn't do that. It's the inner nudge that we have, the still small voice. And it surrounds one of our spiritual practices, which is that of visioning, where we can sit in the silence, we get quiet, and we just sit and we contemplate, and we allow the divine current to bounce off of us, to flow through us, and to reveal to us Spirit's highest ideal for what we're attempting to do or the direction that we want to go. And I think that star, it represents that divine nature speaking to us, through us. We're going to look at a lot of the other elements of the story of the birth of Jesus in the coming weeks, but we're going to take a quick look now at the child. What does the child represent? What's the symbolism of this baby Jesus? First of all, it's the embodiment of divine love. What is a baby if it's not that embodiment of divine love? Secondly, I think it represents a Christ consciousness. That's a big word. What is Christ consciousness? We talk about it in this movement a lot, but what does it really mean? Well, before we can get into what it means, I think it's important that we discuss what is Christ. What does that mean? Well, first of all, Christ is our English adaptation of the Greek word Christo. And the best way to define Christo is to look at its Aramaic equivalent, which is the Messiah. We have to remember, back in those days, the use of Hebrew was falling away. Fewer and fewer people were speaking Hebrew. Most people spoke either Greek or Aramaic, or both. Not as many people spoke Hebrew. And the original word, Messiah, was the Aramaic word, and the Greeks called that Christo. There never was a guy named Jesus Christ, first name Jesus, last name Christ. No, they didn't have that. That term is used by the authors of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, I believe, extensively, but there never was a guy. That Jesus was the name. If the name was actually used then and they were trying to define which Jesus it was, he would have probably been known as Jesus of Nazareth, as opposed to, Jesus of Bethlehem or Jesus of somewhere else, to keep who this Jesus was. If they would have had the Messiah or Christo attached to it, it would have been Jesus the Christ, Jesus the Messiah. So what is Messiah and Christo? Messiah is anointed one, and anointed means to be rubbed with oil. What is that? What's behind all of that is the anointing. It is the recognizing of the divinity, the recognizing of the kingship within. And so this idea of Christ consciousness, that is consciousness, awareness of the divine nature of Jesus of Nazareth. But it isn't limited to that. When we develop and we embrace this concept of Christ consciousness, we can see that divine spark, that anointed, rubbed with oil within each other. We can see it within ourselves and we can see it within each other. And when we can see the divine in all people, in all circumstances, we have transcended to a higher way of being. They used to call it enlightenment. And one of the main elements of enlightenment was being able to see the light, exactly, and to see the light and see the God in one another. I got up on a tangent, I think. Each of us are perfect divine expressions, and we become anointed when we can see that divinity within ourselves and within each other. Each and every one of us is that child. Each and every one of us is that baby. Now, there is a ton of written about what the symbolism is of the gold, the myrrh, and the frankincense. Gold, we know, that's a valuable metal. It's worth a lot of money. Frankincense and myrrh are also very expensive and worth a great deal. They're both sap from a tree. You scrape it and you get where the sap comes out of the tree. The frankincense is often burned, makes a beautiful, beautiful odor. Now it's a little expensive for, common household use to make the room smell good, but it was used by royalty for that. And it's kind of the same thing with myrrh, also a sap, but when it is boiled, it's melted down, it becomes an oil, and when applied, it can be great for arthritis. Now, I don't think the kings were bringing something to, for Jesus' arthritis. He probably didn't have that yet. But it is something that it would be given to a king, to a ruler. And so these three wise men, these infinite intelligence beings that came to honor this baby, came bearing gifts that would be befitting of a king. Gifts that one would give to a king. So they recognized his kingship. And when we can see the kingship in one another, then we have made that transcendent nature. So how does all this apply to our lives? How do we do it? I like to bring all of these talks down into actionable items. What can we do? Ernest Holmes, in The Science of Mind, said, "Every day and every hour we are meeting the eternal realities of life. And in such degree as we cooperate with these eternal realities in love, in peace, in wisdom, and in joy, believing and receiving, we are automatically blessed. Our prayer is answered before it is uttered." So when we're in this season of peace and love and joy and goodwill toward men, all of the qualities that we have just described to this baby, that is really all of us, when we can do that, when we embrace those ourselves, we are automatically blessed and our prayer is answered before it is uttered. Practical application. 3 weeks ago, I was on my way into work, into here, and I was deep in thought. I don't know what I was thinking of, but it was deep, I know that. And I was driving and I got off the exit at Diamond. Brayton Drive is in there, and I pulled off and I saw flashing lights back there. I thought, oh, somebody's in trouble, so I pulled over. Well, he pulled up right behind me. And he asked me why I was in such a hurry. And I said, well, I didn't know I was in a hurry. I said, guess I was trying to get to work. And cut to the chase. He wrote me a ticket. He knocked off 1 mile an hour. He had me at 75, which would have been 4 points and a lot of money. And he made it 74 on his radar gun, so it was only 2 points and $110 fine. So I didn't thank him. It didn't occur to me at the moment, but I stewed around for the next 2 weeks. That isn't fair. Here I am now, good citizen, good Samaritan, going down the Seward Highway every day, going to work twice, going down the highway, sometimes 3. And here I am, 65 miles an hour, zoom, zoom, zoom. People are going by me all the time. I am like the slowest guy on the Seward Highway. That's not fair. Boy, I had the victim mode going. I was in full victim regalia. He was picking on me, that cop. He was. And then I proceeded to lose the citation. And then I found you cannot pay that $110 fine if you don't have the citation number. And I could not find it. I ended up down at the police department. They couldn't find it. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't accept the fine because I didn't have the citation number. So, after I fed the meter and went in and sat before them, sorry, we can't do anything. We'll try and get a hold of the officer to find what. They could see where I was pulled over. They could see but they couldn't take the money because they didn't have that. All of these things just kept adding up, and all of them were self-inflicted. Every one of them, because I failed to see that all I had to do was let it go. Yeah, you were driving too fast. You weren't paying attention. You were anxious to get here and get something done. And if I would have just looked and seen the Christ within myself, if I would have seen the beloved within my policeman, not my policeman, between the policeman that ticketed me, if I could have just done that and let go, I wouldn't have carried that around for 2 weeks. And about the time I said, you're just being a butt about this. Just let it go. I found the thing. I was able to pay it. Everything just fell in once. And then on top of that, I got a wedding gig, and the guy gave me an extra $100 as a tip for doing a wedding, so I paid for my fine. So now I drive down the highway, and I'm doing 65, and the cars are whizzing by, and when they wave to me, I wave back. And sometimes they don't use all 5 fingers. Each one of us is part of the consciousness of God. And our awareness of our own inner divinity is our inner light. And it is that inner light, that awareness of our own divinity. Takeaway for today. This is, Ernest Holmes said this is part of a thing that he gave us called a Sermon by the Sea. He gave it at Silmar not long before he passed away. And that was one of the most powerful talks he ever gave. And this was a line from it. Everything that lives proclaims the glory of God. There is one Spirit in which we live, one mind by which we think, one body of which we are a part, and one light that shineth every man's pathway. And it is that light that is our divinity. And so it was with that awareness of the God quality within each and every one of us that I invite my colleagues to join me in simply holding our congregation in love and light, and simply knowing that that power, that presence is indeed within each and every one of us. And as we go about living in this world, speeding tickets and everything else, we are that perfect expression of the Most High. We deserve the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, because each of us are the king. Each of us are the beloved. And so as we have these human experiences and we face things like lack and limitation, we can simply know that that makes no difference. The thing that's important is that we are recognized as descendants of the Most High. As we face health challenges, we know that this experience is temporary, that our true nature lives on and on and on forever and ever and ever expanding and growing. And we can know most of all that we are loved. We are beings of love. We love one another, and we finally learn to love ourselves. And so we just give thanks. We give thanks for our awareness of that presence within our lives. We just step back, we let it go, we let it be. We love ourselves just as we are. And so it is.